Comencem a endinsar-nos per aquests grans reptes que planteja aquest GEF 2025, concretament per al que busca impulsar l'ecoturisme regeneratiu, inclusiu i accessible. Per això la conferència inaugural anirà a càrrec d'una dona que és una autoritat en aquest enfocament, que promou un model turístic que revitalitza ecosistemes, comunitats i cultures, anant més enllà de només reduir els impactes. La seva filosofia se centra en desenvolupar un turisme amb un enfocament holístic i integral que maximitzi, ara ho dic bé, els beneficis positius per la gent local i també pels visitants, que això no és fàcil. Considerada una de les principals pensadores en el camp emergent del turisme regeneratiu, fa més de 50 anys que treballa com a consultora i estratega en el sector turístic. Els propers 30 minuts ens convidarà a imaginar el futur, l'ecoturisme en un món de transformació. Rebem amb un fort aplaudiment Anna Pollock, fundadora de Conscious.Travel. Endavant, Anna. From now, the session is yours.
Well, good morning. And thank you so much for giving me a second, or actually a third chance to come to your beautiful Catalonia. I'm falling in love, and after an introduction that's talking all about seduction, I can just see where this is going to go. In fact, I do want to just make that point. This is exactly what we're being asked to do in ecotourism, and that is to help our customers fall in love with nature again. So that's it, really. I'm going to go and sit down now. But I'm what they call I guess I'm a theorist in a sense. A lot of people put theory down. I prefer to see it as helping us understand what we're looking at, understand what is really going on. So I'm going to try in the next 30, maybe 35, if I can buy a little bit of your coffee break time, give you a rapid introduction to why we need to change, why seduction is actually the order of the day. And, you know, that's where I want to go. But this involves probably the biggest shift in human consciousness in several hundred years. So I also ask you to be patient. Be patient with yourself. There is an awful lot to learn or to feel or to experience as we shift what I call our paradigm, our way of understanding the world. So having said all that, I'm going to go through quite quickly. The presentation I will make available to anyone who writes to me. The reason for that is then I know who you are. Otherwise, you're just nameless faces. And I would really like to have an opportunity to exchange things. I've been given the task of talking about imagining the future, ecotourism in a changing world, and the role of ecotourism in building a just, regenerative, and resilient society. I'm to do that in 30 minutes, so forgive me if I go fairly quickly. Okay, what do we know about the future? Well, that's simple. It hasn't happened yet. But the future, or the present in the future, is the sum total of our actions and the choices that we make together today. Actions and choices are shaped by our invisible thoughts, our beliefs, our assumptions and values. And it's those beliefs, assumptions and values that have to be made conscious. They're generally invisible. We've internalized them. We've been brainwashed by them, in a sense, in our upbringing over time. But now we need to change nearly all of those assumptions, and if we do that, our values will change. Now, when I was growing up, when young, born, whatever, this is what my parents were imagining in the 1950s. It looks fairly similar. The houses are bigger now. There are more subdivisions. We've got so much fast food. We've got our TVs, obviously, and we have our cars are much more sophisticated. Even back then in the 1950s, they were imagining drones. We aren't seeing them flying over our cities yet unless they're unwanted. Fortunately, no one's invented the vehicle on the right of your screen, or we'd all be in trouble. We did imagine, though, that our children might be looking at screens. They didn't realize those screens were highly portable, as in your phones, but nevertheless, we imagined it back then in the 1950s. We also had, actually, in our assumptions that were shaping our imaginings, excuse me, a set of assumptions that we hadn't necessarily acknowledged. And these assumptions go back probably several hundred years as our current scientific understanding was developing. And it started here, right here in Europe. First of all, that Earth was essentially a dead machine, okay? It was operating on mechanical, physical principles. That all you see out there, you, the trees, the birds, the ground, is a thing. It's solid. You can touch it. You can measure it. That we can use a scientific method of understanding reality. And unless we used that method, we really didn't know what we were talking about. We lost our authority. I could go into this at great length, but that led to a belief in scarcity. And scarcity led to a need to be competitive. And we're still living this now. It also led us to think that we humans are superior to the rest of the living world. That we could extract from that, and we could then be the top dog, if you like, in the system. These are all assumptions that are still underlying nearly all our institutions' beliefs and behaviors. What has it led to? Well, I think most people who are thinking about this today think this is exactly where it's led to today. We're sitting literally at a turning point, at a crossroads. We can go one way to the left, which is looking rather familiar territory if you look at the television screen occasionally, or we could go to a Garden of Eden on the right. That choice has been made available, in a sense, by all of those invisible assumptions. So, the world is experiencing not one crisis anymore, but many. This came from the Carbon Institute a few years ago when it was still seen as appropriate to divide up all those crises into nice little titles and consider them separately. So the scientists working in all of those areas, the researchers, were all in boxes, one called climate, one called biodiversity. And only now are we beginning to understand the full interconnections of those. It's also been described, obviously, as a polycrisis, since we have more than one crisis. A polycrisis is understood now to be a situation where all of those risks are compounded because they are, in fact, utterly interconnected. So the overall impact of these crises is far greater. Most recently, this is the new work from Kate Raworth of Donut Economics and the Stockholm Resilience Institute, who have now tried for the very first time to look at the total ecological picture and the social picture. So the inside of the donut looks at social deliverables, you know, to make people a safe place for people to live and flourish and be well and healthy. And the red bars show where we're overshooting the ecological boundaries. So there is an attempt now to be able to measure what ecological and social cultural health and well-being look like together. What should we be looking at if we're saying we're being successful? This is a major breakthrough. Hopefully it will get through to all the levels of government so that we can shift our thinking on just one measure of success, which has traditionally been GDP. So associated with associated with all of that are other, if you like, assumptions that I also just want to name so that we could give them consideration over the next few days. The first and biggest major root cause of our problem, and I see it every day, is a sense of separation. That I am separate from you. That I am separate from the tree out there. I'm a thing, I'm separate. That has also led to a high degree of selfishness in our economy. I love this cartoon. It's from Giles Hutchins, one of my mentors. I recommend you read his work. where we're sitting on a boat that's obviously got a hole in it and people are bailing it out, but other people are saying, it's not happening up my end of the boat, it's not my problem. And I think every day we're faced with that on the television when we're seeing problems here, there, and everywhere. And it's actually a natural response to almost say, well, I can't do anything about it, it's not my problem. But this is what the fundamental assumption that we do, in fact, need to correct. We can see that in tourism by the very fact that this is how the UNWTO actually describes our sector. Again, we are one box, one sector within a total economy. I'm not going to ask you to read any of the boxes. I only want you to see that there are boxes and lines, and that's how we think we operate as an industry. All right? An industry looks like you can control. If you're running a department, I'm looking at Christina who's nodding, you can't control it, much though you might wish to. It doesn't operate like that. It operates like a sort of fuzzy network. If you look at an ant's nest, it looks even more organized perhaps than tourism does some days. We love in tourism to divide things up. We love to divide, define, give it a name. There are 35 different types of tourism on this list. Which one are you in? All right, what does that do? Every time we put a label on something, we automatically separate it. So ecotourism is in there, I'm pleased to say. It's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down on the left. So is sustainable tourism. I think, there's no regenerative tourism either, so we've added another one. We've got 36 now. All right, but the minute you do that, you separate, you add to the sense of separation, when in fact what we're being asked to do today is to integrate. It's the complete opposite. In fact, everything we do probably has an opposite right now that we need to be investigating. We mechanize, that's the other thing we do as part of that model. We've turned what is a natural act of hospitality into a production consumption system in order to be accepted within the bigger economic system that demands, again, that we rationalize, materialize, mechanize, etc. So the language changes. I led to the fact that that can often lead to a sense of scarcity. Sometimes it's false scarcity, but nevertheless, we believe that resources are scarce. The earth is a lumberyard of resources that we need to compete for. That leads to mistrust. That leads to a desire to control. It leads to this visceral need for more, more, more. It also leads, as I mentioned at the beginning, to a perceived lack of agency. It's not my problem. I can't do anything about it. I'm too small. Or it leads to a need to control. We're seeing and in order to control, you have to have resources. So the rich get richer, get to the top of the pile, and they seek to control. We're seeing that visibly every day on the news at the moment. It leads to a breakdown of community because we live in isolation. We live in our houses, we travel to work in our cars, we're cut off from each other, and what we're seeing is community breakdown, low levels of trust, severe disconnection with nature. We often even call it nature. I was thrilled this morning in the first presentations from your leaders, all talking about nature, not the environment. 2 or 3 years ago, you would have talked about the environment. There's a big difference once you begin to change your vocabulary. So that's all. I get all the bad news out as fast as I can. It's leading to what we call a meta-crisis. The key thing about that is a shift of understanding that there is one root cause of that meta-crisis. The meta-crisis requires us to have a metamorphosis. What's the difference? Not a change. It's a fundamental change in the state of being, not in the way we do things. And that's why this stuff gets pretty heavy at times. Because Albert, good old Albert, had it right. He had so many things right. It's all up here. It's all in how we think. That's why I still talk about this stuff. It could be dismissed as theory, but if you don't understand what's going on up here, you don't understand the principles or basis for what you're doing, then you can tinker around at the edges with different actions and be going completely down the wrong road. So please don't consider this merely theory. Because when we change the way we think, the way we understand the world, the way we look at what's outside, how we see it, is it the environment, a resource I can harvest, or is it a living being that I can work in cooperation with? Once you change that, you change everything. Your perception changes, leads to what you value. Now you will value what's outside there. It's actually inside me. It's all the same. I will start to value it. I will start to behave differently towards it. And then my behavior will change. So I think seeing it in this order is really important. It's what we need to do is put on a different set of lenses to see the world as living, not as dead. So as I said, you can have all of these slides. I have to include more here than I've got time to talk about in depth. So just concentrate on the top line. What are we asked to do at the top? First of all, we're being asked to see ourselves as part of a living earth, not a dead machine, and to question our assumptions. Replace them with a whole new set of understanding and assumptions that life is a networked, living system. Obviously, it's living. Earth is living. Our being together actually in this conference is a form of living system because you're all connected one with the other. You're all trying to reach agreement on some direction in the future for you as a whole and individually. We are nature. This is the biggest change. Nature isn't a thing, an environment, a resource. It's our relative. We are relatives. This is the indigenous perspective, but we are all one with nature. So once you start changing these assumptions, then everything else changes. Forgive me for not going into the detail, but I've only got another 15 minutes. So we inhabit this beautiful living planet. It's not a dead rock. So primary task right now, beyond any other, is to learn how nature really works. This is Gregory Bateson, brilliant ecologist of the 1940s. So I think I heard the word education earlier in the introduction. I believe, and I'm excited that I'm here with eco-tourism people, because to me, you're on the front line. You're bringing our customers in the travel and tourism industry out into the natural world. You're probably in the best position to start to help people engage with nature, to feel comfortable in nature, to start to love nature. So that role as education is absolutely of importance, and if you can do that in fun and enjoyable experiential ways, all the better. Certainly not talk about it in the way I'm having to lecture you right now. So systems change actually is happening, and that's what a metamorphosis requires. We have a dominant system that is in decline. It brought us lots of success. It's where we all are right now. Without that, last 300 or 400 years of economic development, scientific development, we wouldn't be here. But it's now reached its zenith, and it is declining because it's lost touch with this natural world that I talked about. That is emerging. We call it different names. It's not clear how it's all going to work out. It may or may not work out, depending on how many people begin to make that shift. But that's exactly why what your work you're doing is not just about taking people out on walks in the country. It's about changing a whole generation's attitude to the natural world. I like this graph because I think it really describes where we're at right now. I have to take a drink. Because I think we're all working, particularly in mainstream tourism, if you like, very hard, walking up a hill with backpacks on our back, trying to reach the other side. We assume it's at the top of the mountain, but in actual fact, when we get up there, we realize, oops, maybe we took the wrong path. Does that make sense? All right, so we need to go back down again and investigate those assumptions, etc., to go forward. So another way of putting that diagram is with this one, where we see ourselves going along. This is a timeline that way. We have for many years just extracted value from nature. We're now trying then to do less harm to it, to leave fewer negative outputs as a result. That's called sustainability. And more recently, there's been this idea that we should give something back. Now that unfortunately is exactly how many people understand regeneration. Regeneration is so much more than that. I believe this is taking us up to what I call a kind of like a brick wall that requires us to do so much more. So at the moment, with regeneration, we're talking about restoration, improvement, we're adding social cultural dimensions to it, we're talking about minimizing leakage, distributing benefits. That's all really good stuff, but it's not regeneration that I understand. It's not deep enough to get us to where we need to go. It's what I call regeneration light. Don't stop doing it, but don't convince yourself you're doing the really hard stuff. Because what we need to do now is make a shift in thinking. The beautiful thing about regeneration is understanding this. That's what life does. That's what your body is doing at the moment. That's what everything that's living at the moment is doing as a constant activity. It is regenerating itself. That's what we do to create the conditions for all life to survive and thrive. So if we want to be successful individually, we need to contribute to that, the larger whole of which we are a part. So it's about bringing what was dying, and we saw lots of pictures of our current society kind of like dying, and bringing it back to life. It's about breathing new life back where life maybe wasn't before. It's also a process of remembering, because this way of thinking, this relationship with the natural world, is what we've always understood as humanity. It's just only in the last several hundred years have we tended to forget and think we could control it. So it means crossing over. This is a diagram from Otto Scharmer, who's done a lot of work on how we need to shift our thinking. It means going down first, going down that mountain, going into what's not really visible, and examining, questioning before we can climb up out again. We then need to replace those outdated assumptions for new ones, and then we can start to move. And that's going to involve our physical bodies, okay? We're going to change physically, we're going to start sensing differently, we're going to go out there and realize that every one of those plants are talking to one another. They're just using a different kind of intelligence. This is not woo-woo stuff, this is modern science. It's now been proven just how plants communicate with one another is just not in the way that we're familiar with. We're going to need to get in touch again with our hearts, with our emotions, with our feelings. It is, someone used the word spiritual earlier, and I was very pleased that that word was used, because this ends up being a sacred relationship, a recognition that life is sacred, and we need to, not need, but a natural thing is to respect that and bring it to the fore. So the how that I talked about before, do we get through the brick wall, is we do the work it takes to understand the fundamental nature of what we're being asked to do on planet Earth right now. And I know this sounds, a bit evangelical, but every one of you are in this room because you're interested. You have a reason to be here, and you're on the forefront of that change. So the star on the right, what we're aiming towards, is a regenerative and just planet that's aligned with life. And we're going to have to learn now how to work with nature's forces. And nature, basically, the natural world is dying for us to wake up and learn to be in partnership with her. So the fundamental where we're at, this diagram to me sums it up beautifully. We're moving from the ego idea of being in charge, of controlling, of having 10-point plans and strategies. I know every one of you probably have to work on those as a part of your job description. Nature doesn't have a 10-point plan. Nature has evolved over 3.8 billion years since she first appeared on planet Earth. So she's done a pretty good job of it, mind you. She's had a bit more time than you've got, or we have. But the idea is when we're in that ego state, we think we're a top dog and that we can control, we can manage, we can extract. This next step, which many of us in the room, I would argue nearly all of you are in, is understanding, no, we are part of nature and our job is to take care of it, to conserve it, and maybe to manage it a little bit. But the next one, which is seva, it's an Indian word, Sanskrit word, I believe, for caring for life, stewarding. That is our true role. And then we understand our potential as a keystone species. So that we are important in the same way that wolves in certain environments change the ecosystem. We've got stories you can see on YouTube, I'm sure you've heard of those, where you introduce a predator into an environment and they can change the whole ecosystem because of their impact on the other animals. But basically that's a very different approach that the wolves are taking. The wolves are just doing their wolvery thing. We're being asked to do this consciously and serve the well-being of the entire planet on which we live. So there are really some serious implications of all of this. It's understanding that nature doesn't just survive, it orchestrates. It brings all parts, every part of nature is working to bring every other part of nature into being fully alive and flourishing. The primary goal, I think, and so do many others now, is aliveness. This notion of having vitality and viability to be able to make a good contribution to life. Each of us is utterly important. This is the other thing. It's understood that we're all fractals, as it were. So what I do, what I say, makes a difference. What you do and what you say, as you did to me this morning, I'm talking to the Director of Environment, is that right? Makes a difference, okay? Those words made a difference. All of a sudden, oh, seduction, I really can relate to that, okay? Don't get the wrong idea, but you understand. So what I am trying to say to you is every one of you has an opportunity to do what nature is asking of you, and that is to partner with her, with each other, learn more, and start to make a contribution in your own self-way. It's called waking up, growing up, and stepping up, in other words. The second thing is that no entity can go it alone. The ecotourism folks can't act alone. The gastronomy people can't act alone. The transportation people can't act alone. The economists, etc. We need to come together in what is natural in nature, and that's a web of harmonious working relationships, a network of entangled, interdependent communities. Communities, I'm a community, by the way. My body is a community. It's not just Anna, it's an incredibly complex community, as in your body and so on. But I would argue that the real focus that we should be looking at is in terms of, when you talk of action, how do I start? Well, to me, you start by belonging to a community. So I say to people, start by coming home. Come back to the very place that makes you feel fully alive. Come back to the place where you feel you might belong. Come back to the place where you just, your spirits rise every time you turn the corner and you see something that you've become familiar with. Because that's the kind of organization you're going to need, or the kind of structure you're going to need in order to make a change. You can't just go out there and do it all by yourself. That's where the web of the life, takes meaning. So our primary role, and the primary role of every living being, from the microorganisms in my gut all the way through to my heart, all the way through to my entire being, is to contribute to the health and well-being of the system of which it is part. That's how nature works. If you come away with just that understanding, we'll be doing fine. So, in the last 2 minutes, again, just to recap really, you're already in stage number 1. Shouldn't stand in front of this, should I? I hope I haven't blocked too many people's view. See nature as your teacher and as your relative, as your kin. In many countries in the world, there is a very large indigenous population, and they have an advantage there. I won't go into our history. Obviously, it's pretty brutal. We don't have as many people that have with that history of several thousand years of being on a particular piece of land. But indigenous people can teach us a lot. They talk about their nature as their kin. They talk about a kin-centric economy, a kin-centric ways of being and doing. So let's start just by changing your vocabulary. And again, I noticed a shift in what was how the word was used in the beginning. Really come together and learn how nature does think, how nature grows. Develop those capacities within you. The problem at the moment with our existing paradigm is that it values what goes on up here. If you've got a smart brain, especially if you can do math and physics, you were top, brightest guy. Now if you can do AI, you're the top, you're somebody to be venerated. Lawyers, not so much anymore. Used to be lawyers, right? But it was all up here, your ability to think and analyze, I think, therefore I can, or I am, or whatever. Now it's how you can, actually, it's going to be the capacity to sense. In other words, using all faculties of your body to sense what's going on, to read a room, to go out and read a community, to sense whether it's healthy or not. That is a fundamental difference. It means starting to get in touch with our feelings, to use your heart to enable you to listen with care and compassion. To use your intuition. As I said, we have a spiritual aspect of our being that connects us, that gives us our lives meaning. So in other words, it's really enriching who we are and how we act. Because what is the goal? And that is, again, aliveness, another word for vitality. Having the capacity then to do something about it. This is what leads to action. I almost guarantee that probably over the next few days, you're going to be talking a lot about action. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to talk about thinking. So don't get me wrong, you're going to have to act, but bear in mind what I said right at the beginning, act from a position of full understanding. Our role now is to be a steward and caretaker of the world we live in, and that is not just of nature. That is all the people in our communities. This embraces the social, cultural aspect of what we're doing. But if we can, and this is the ecosystem, the ecotourism advantage, if we can help our clients fall in love with nature, they too will find the motivation to make the changes that we need to make, and their enthusiasm will infect others. That's my theory of change. It's infection, basically. And do this in communities of care. Because finally, I think the essence really that we need to build where we live, where we work, if you're in ecotourism, where you take your clients to, if you are an operator that takes people all over the world, find one area that really you relate to most and start to work with that. Obviously, if you're on the receiving end, then it's your community that we're talking about. Either way, it is a place that has a distinct geographical, geological, historical identity where you can start to see how nature manifests itself there and build that self-organizing capacity within that place. In many places right now, this is happening naturally. All this change is happening from the ground up. There are people doing this right now. It's just amazing to me. I'm not sure whether it's just the algorithm that's working, delivering me news every day of exciting things happening on the ground, but I believe the change is taking place, and it's taking place there as well. We've talked about aliveness, we've talked about regenerative, the R, and evolving together. That's, to me, is what care really means, and that's what we're being asked to do. So, to me, this is this guy, Ernesto van Peebury, he's a financial analyst and an engineer, and he's now writing pure poetry about regeneration. And he says, vitality is that pulse. It's the sound of our reciprocity, our giving back made visible. I love this. He said you can hear it in the laughter of a community garden. You can hear it in the clarity of a mountain stream, in the hum of a syntropic forest at dusk. Because where there is vitality, there is relationship. Where there is relationship, there is care. And where there is care, there is hope. And that's why I'm positive, and that's why I appreciate me going just a little over my time for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Moltes gràcies. Thank you very much.